I have a really weird thing to talk to you about today, which, if you know me at all, then you know there's no chance of it not being weird, but it's gonna be like weirder than usual. So we're gonna talk about creating powerful art, which is a very strange sort of topic to me. Like, what does powerful mean? What does it mean to even make art? You know, there's this whole sort of conversation to be had around that. To me, the conversation could go in 20 different ways. How do you make powerful art? I could give you literally probably a 100-point list of how to do it. But there's only one that actually matters. And I have decided that the way to make powerful art is to be completely unself-conscious. And there's a reason why I've landed on this word, unself-conscious. And it's because I watch people all the time make art. And by the way, if you're here, I consider you an artist. I'm not differentiating between photographer, painter, writer, whatever. I watch people make a lot of art, and I watch people be very unsure of themselves in the art that they make. I hear people say constantly things like, I'm not sure if this is good. I'm not sure if people will like this. I'm gonna look stupid if I make this. This is an example of me looking stupid. I made this on the side of a highway, a very busy highway. And I remember I was just completely covered in blue paint. This was after I cleaned myself, which is kind of ridiculous. I made this knowing that there would be people speeding past and looking out of their car windows. What I didn't expect was for about 10 cars to stop and just watch as I did this photo shoot, which was pretty embarrassing. So I was so covered in paint that I had to breathe through a straw in the picture because I couldn't even breathe. Every time I sucked in air through my nose, I got paint up my nose. It was really uncomfortable. But I've spent my whole career making things that are uncomfortable and that people are largely watching me do. So I want to give you a little backstory of where I started my creative journey. My journey started in roughly 2004 when I was in high school. And I remember distinctly writing this short story that was, I'm not sure the best way to describe it. Let's say it was an allegory, it was a metaphor in which I read this out loud in my 10th grade class, and the story went where I said, okay, the story is about this girl, and she has these little people in her mind, and they're trying to corrupt her innocence. And in my short story, eventually the end was that she had a nosebleed, and all the little people came out as blood cells, and she shed the negative corruption from her life, but actually it was a metaphor for menstruating for the first time. It was a whole thing, you know, like super normal. And so I read that story, and my whole class was just like, okay, like moving on to the next person. And then that's how my whole career has been, just like that. Like basically just like, here's a weird thing that I did, and everyone's like, all right, well, you know, we're gonna go find something pretty to look at instead. So my career has been that. So I moved on to film school. I actually went to film school and got a film degree as well as in English literature. And when I got my film degree, the same things were happening. So like I had a job in a nursing home. And I've worked in many nursing homes. I love nursing homes. I actually met my husband in a nursing home, but he was working there too. He was not in the nursing home. And so I was working in the basement of this nursing home. I was folding laundry after school and in the early mornings and stuff. And I worked with one of my best friends. So we were the only people there who were under 70 years old working at this nursing home. So we could fold laundry like nobody's business. Like we were so fast. So we had 4-hour shifts. I would work for 2 of them, and then I would make movies for the second half of every single shift in this nursing home because it was the creepiest place, y'all. It was like this old, just dirty basement of this nursing home. So I would bring my little video camera and make these movies. My first one that I made was about my friend working with me, and I pretended like the basement was like an insane asylum, you know, like a really old one. And so she's just like rocking back and forth, like going nuts. And then I filmed her running down the halls, and she's like smearing ketchup on the walls, you know, because it was blood, but I don't even know why she was bleeding. It was kind of weird. And then at the end, she just drowns herself in a pool. Boom, the end. Okay, so that was my whole movie, my very first one, and it actually won a local film award that I entered it into. And that was it. I was like, I'm gonna be a filmmaker. I'm gonna be the best filmmaker ever. And so I went to film school. My films got progressively darker, if you can imagine it. And I graduated, and I immediately was like, wow, film sucks. I don't wanna do this anymore. So I picked up a camera, and my first images were a little weird, you could say. I am really obsessed with death. It's something we're gonna talk about. Don't be afraid, it's all good. And so one of my first images I remember so distinctly, I had this, I was in like a really crappy apartment in Los Angeles at the time. We had almost no space, but I had this really old refrigerator that was there. And I just loved this refrigerator. And I was working on a little series at the time, this was in 2009, that I called Small Deaths. And it was just me looking dead in different places, like revolutionary, right? And so that's what I did. And when I did this, I would just like, one day I crawled into a trash can, you know, out back behind my apartment. One day I pulled a shopping cart, they are so heavy, FYI. If you ever try to pull a shopping cart to your second story apartment, just don't. And I pulled it up there and I got in the shopping cart, and all the time, like I'm literally just this, like just me like that, like just dead everywhere. And I was really good at it though. Like if you want to go look at that work, I'm just saying, like I was pretty convincing. And so I remember doing this photo where I got a step ladder and I climbed into my freezer, like a top freezer box in the refrigerator. But I couldn't really get myself in there. I'm sure you've never tried to climb in your freezer, but if you had, you would know it's really challenging. And so I didn't know how to fit myself in there. So I called my husband into the room, and I'm like, you know, I'm just wearing underwear, right? And I'm like, can you push me in? Like once I get my butt up in there, can you just push? And so he was like, yeah, why not? So I've got my butt up there and I'm like this and he's pushing. And so I eventually like squeezed myself in, and then every picture was out of focus. I just forgot to set the focus on my camera because at that time, autofocus, you just couldn't do it with a self-portrait, and what a thing. So I had to get in and out of that freezer so many times to do this photo, but I loved that photo. And so my existence, my career, like everything about me at that time and largely now was dedicated to creating weird stuff where I had an amazing experience doing it. And that was the whole point of it. I started creating art that I thought nobody was going to like, but at the same time knew that people needed to see. And I think that there's an incredible intersection between what you love and what your purpose is. I don't know if you've ever heard the term ikigai. It's an amazing term that you should look up, and it's this intersection where your purpose meets your passion, your vocation, and that's what I was doing without realizing it. I create a little bit differently now. Not much differently. This is my happiest picture I could share with you. I literally could not find a happier picture, so here we are. That said, things are gonna get weird, so we're gonna see some darker art than this, absolutely, okay? But this is really my happiest image that I've made in a long time. And I'm not making sad pictures because I'm sad, although actually I am sad right now, but we'll talk about that in a minute too. I make dark art because I want to understand darkness better, because I have this utmost respect for darkness and the light that it inspires us to find. So I'm creating dark art. But where does great art come from? That's the question. Where does it come from? And I really think that it comes from being unself-conscious. It comes from understanding that you have something to say and that it is not your job to care about how people react to it or how they feel about you doing it, because you have something to say. I will never apologize for the art that I create. And I actually want to say a really heartfelt thank you to B&H and to Sony for having me here and allowing me to show you the images in this presentation, because I have legitimately been on stages where I have clicked through my presentation and, oh, my pictures are gone from the presentation. Where are they? And then later I find out that whoever I was speaking for took them out because they didn't think it was appropriate to show those to an audience. And this did not, well, I mean, I'm crossing fingers. I don't think that has happened here. Guess we'll find out. But, and so it's really, really meaningful to me to be able to show this to you. So great art comes from being unself-conscious, but it also comes from a lot of other things. And we're going to talk about that. So here's this intersection that I kind of mentioned. There's impact, there's story, there's technique. Now, these might be obvious, okay? So you might be looking at this and being like, well, of course that's where it comes from. But how do we actually master those things? How do we look at our technique and know that it is good enough to tell the story that we're trying to tell? And then how do we connect that story to a wider audience to create an impact? And I've got ideas, y'all. Okay, so first we'll start with technique. And I want to show you a little bit of my technique throughout this presentation and how it works. This is pretty representative of my work. This is from a series, a very small series that I created called Night Terrors, because I have chronic night terrors. So almost every night I wake up screaming because I think that something is attacking me. I don't recommend it, it's like, it's not a fun experience, but it did inspire this art, which is pretty cool, so, I guess it's give and take. I love creating from darkness. So I've been having these night terrors for years now, about 4 years, and a lot of them feature bugs. And if you know anything about me, you know that I have a very large dead bug collection. So I went to my dead bug collection and I picked out this magnificent beetle and I started creating with it. There we are. I hate showing behind the scenes sometimes because it's never good. Like, all of my pictures look like this, where I'm making this weird face, here, but it is what it is. And I'm showing you this because I like to create practically. I don't like to create digital assets or buy stock images. For me, the whole reason why I'm doing it is because I love this process of sitting in front of the camera and behind the camera and playing with my dead things and so on and so forth. I'm actually vegan and very dedicated to the vegan cause, but I have a lot of dead things in my house. So beetles are just one of the many. And so I keep anything that I find. So here I am photographing myself. This was just for the beetle. I did put on a costume for the image and all of that. And this was just shot in my garage. I do not have a studio. I shoot by myself, for myself. The forest is my oasis, and that's where I do almost everything. So this is in my garage. And here I am with my beetle, photographing that, getting real close and personal with it. And I actually get really freaked out by dead things, which is partly why I do this a lot. And so every time, I have it, by tweezers, this little beetle, and every time I'd kind of touch it to my face, it would always kind of twitch. It's dead, but it would just slip a little, and every time I would just throw it across the room, and then I have to go find this stupid beetle. I get really, really afraid of what I do, but I do it anyway. So there's the technique, and then we've got the story of the thing. And in this image in particular, I always have a story, but in this one in particular, I felt this real connection to this idea. The idea being that I feel that there is this darkness inside of me that is trying to crawl out of my body. And so what does that look like for this darkness to come out and for me to have to sew myself back up again? What does it mean to give your darkness wings and to take flight with it and to embrace it? So I've got these stories, but story is really just a whole bunch of visuals that we assign properties to that we universally understand, because storytelling is the universal language, particularly visual storytelling. So when you look at this, you might see something completely different, and that's totally fine. And I use ambiguous symbols in my work so that you can understand a story, and I can too. We're all equally kind of pulling something out of this image. And then there's impact. Impact is when we think about how we want to make people feel with our work. So I don't really care if you shoot portraits or nature or yourself with a dead bird on your face in your garage like I do. Is there anybody who's like, okay? So, so this is what I'm doing, and I'm thinking about impact. I'm thinking about how are other people going to read this image? How do I want to make a difference in the world? And for me, that answer is vital, because I would not be here creating art if I did not care about the people I was creating for. In the fine art world, I'm a fine art photographer. That means that I make work, and then I worry later about how it's going to get sold. That's really all it means. People think it's like a super fancy thing, and if you ask some people, maybe they'll say it is, but that's just because they need to for their jobs, and they're actually wrong. It doesn't mean anything fancy. It just means that you make work for yourself personally, and then, boom, you try to sell it later. I do that. I'm a conceptual photographer. That means the idea comes first. And I'm a self-portrait artist, and so that means I'm photographing myself by myself. All right, so impact. I am only creating because I care about other people. I'm not creating because I think that I have this thing that needs to be let out and I just have to. Sure, I would, and I'm not saying that's not part of it. But for me, it's equally to make an impact in the world because I am a purpose-driven person. That's just how I function. So here are my raw images straight out of camera in my garage, same spot as the Beatles. There's my dead bird. Look at me being so responsible with my gloves. I find dead things a lot. I think you just have to look, probably, and then you'll find them, but everyone always says, I don't find any dead things. And I'm like, then you're not hunting for them. I don't mean literally hunting. Don't get me wrong. No, just looking. Okay, so here's a little video. We might not watch the whole thing, just a little bit of my process.
In my garage, I'm going to start shooting my next picture for my new series called Night Terrors, which is inspired by my night terrors. I'm gonna have my tripod set up about there, pointing this direction. My car's over there. And I'm gonna use this window light to light the scene. Really, really simple. I'm also using a dead bird that I found a couple weeks ago. I took pictures of it then and then buried it. So that's what I'm going to do. I've got my camera on the tripod now, and I kind of notice that there's this light here. So this seems like a good spot to put
I am so fancy,
the
right?
stool where I'll be sitting. Something like that, where the light's good. It's pretty. This would be even better, just a little bit forward, since my head will be up here. Yeah. I have to pick a costume that goes really well with the feathers of the bird. So something just really soft and gauzy. And I have this tutu thing, and that could work really well, but I don't want it to be too overbearing. So I might do this one. But I know that I have some tulle fabric in here somewhere. I'm not super organized. Here it is. So one of these will have to be it. Maybe some combination, we'll see. Oh, my garage light went off, so that's good. Ah, the light's so much nicer now. Well, we're gonna go with both, I think. I don't know. It might be too foofy. Well, it might be too much. We'll see. I have my camera set now. I'm using the Sony a7R IV and the 24-70mm lens, and I've got my remote here, which is the Sony RMT DSLR2 remote. So I'm just going to trigger with my 2-second timer and then pose. The one thing that I want to pay attention to is the final composition. So for example, I'm going to have the bird covering my face with its wing.
Okay, so that's some of my process. And well, what a still frame, let's just not. Okay, so my process is just that, like being completely by myself, nothing fancy. I just love the feeling of being alone. That's the whole sentence. I just love it. I don't know if you work like that, or if you have clients, or if you have a team or anything like that. It's not for me. I want to be alone when I work. I don't want anybody giving me opinions when I work. I just want to trust myself and be in the moment. And so I created this series, just like you saw, sitting in my garage, picking out my little costumes, mostly not talking to a camera, but sometimes, and posing. And I've had to learn how to be a storyteller, both behind the camera and in front of the camera. And I've done that by understanding that you can have the best ideas in the world, but if your technique isn't there to tell that story, then nobody cares. And you can have the best technique, but if your story isn't there to support that, then nobody cares. And I want people to care. I am not this artist that's going to stand up here and say to you, I don't care what people think of my work. No, I care very much what people think of my work, not because I am personally offended or delighted by it, but because my goal as an artist is to change people's lives. And I think that I've succeeded in some ways. So recently, I found these two elk skeletons in my forest. I live in like the middle of nowhere, so these things just happen. I found these elk skeletons, and I put them together for a photo. Cool. I freed up a lot of space. Okay, so this almost looks like it's not attached. Okay, so we're gonna have to pretend like it's attached.
Okay.
So this is going like this.
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's gonna look good.
Yeah, it is.
Ugh. All right, I'll get this in.
Oh, Jesus. Get the head. How does this go?
Like this. Yeah.
I'm gonna need to angle it. Might not be far.
Yeah!
That looks so cool!
Oh my gosh, the way they meet, that looks badass.
It does.
I think this is gonna be cooler than we are getting in it.
Mm-hmm.
This is so cool. Okay. There's definitely a bug on my face.
Did that one have like the mass exodus of bugs over there? Yeah, there are some over there.
There are definitely like
I wonder what those are.
some kind of flesh-eating something.
Yeah, they were flesh-eating bugs, actually, I learned. And this is just what I do. Like, I don't feel at all intimidated by trying something new. I did look up safety guidelines in dealing with bones, and apparently the flesh-eating beetles only really like dead flesh. You know, they're kind of into necrosis. So I was pretty safe, although I did end up laying in between these bones and did have bugs crawling on me, but it's fine. That was like 2 months ago, so you don't have to worry if I give you a hug. I am so clean right now. And this kind of thing causes a reaction in people. I used to hear a lot in my career at the beginning that people would say, oh, you just make stuff for shock value. Like, there's no reason behind what you're doing. You just want to get a rise out of somebody. They're not wrong. I love getting a rise out of somebody. I think it's so exciting. It's not the only reason why I do it, of course. It's not even one of the top reasons why I do it. But people used to say that to me as an insult. And I took it as an insult, and I was really hurt by that because I was at the beginning of my career, and I wanted to be seen as a real artist, as like a serious artist who everybody respected, who people thought that I was doing this stuff because it like meant something huge and amazing. And now that I'm not at the beginning of my career anymore, I don't care at all what people think about what I'm doing. I simply know what I like and what is meaningful to me. And that has become meaningful to other people. So I recently released this image, and it caused a bit of a fuss on the internet, which is like kind of amazing to be able to do at this point, right? Like, I don't know, I love when people are mad at me about something. So people were mad, lots of people being like, you know, several death threats, stuff like that. People being like, I'm gonna look up where you live, and I'm like, oh dear God. So please no. So I got this one message of someone who wrote to me and said, I hope that somebody murders you in the forest and leaves your body there, and then I hope that somebody finds your body and does something horrible to it. Okay. I'm like, you know, I hope so too. What a way to go. Like, if I'm gonna die in a forest, right, I hope somebody finds my body and makes art with it. That would be amazing. And the reason why I think this is because, first of all, I'm afraid of death. I am afraid of what happens after we die. I don't know what that is. I don't have any judgments about it. I just know that I'm pretty attached to life, and the idea of not being alive is terrifying. So I make art about it so that I can feel better connected to my eventual demise. I am happy to take pictures with elk skeletons because then they live on later, and I think that's an incredible thing. So if you find my body, please take a picture, okay? Just any which way, I honestly don't care, all right? So I have a lot of art that expresses this darkness, this idea of mortality, the idea that we can create something that goes beyond ourselves. I write a lot as well. I love to put a piece of writing with my work, and so you'll often see, if you're looking at my work, that the writing is just as important as the image. Because we as artists, we cannot rely on this idea that an image will speak for itself, particularly not in the time that we live in. So I love to put sentiments, to put words with my images, to heighten how you feel about it, to connect the technique with the story, to create a true impact in what we're doing. These are the actual 3 ways that I would say we create powerful art, okay? You know your purpose. Purpose is king or queen in the world of art, in the world of photography. If you don't know why you are called to create, you need to figure that out. And if you don't know how to figure it out, shut off all phones and computers for 1 day and just sit alone in your house and stare at a wall. And that's how you figure it out. You just spend time with yourself. What does it mean to be you? What is your message? What do you want to say to the world? And there's a reason why it's in this order. You know your purpose. Like, I want to make this impact in the world. I want to do this thing. I'm called to be this. And then you figure out how you're going to express your purpose. And then finally you ask, now that I know those 2 things, how do I want to make people feel with this thing that I'm going to create? And if you can do all 3 of those things, know your purpose, know your message, and make people feel something, then you have succeeded in creating powerful art. So here we are. I'm making this art. It may be weird, whatever, but it's what I love. I am called to this in a way, like, I think, honestly, after I die and after you take pictures with my body, I really want somebody to study my brain because I feel so deeply connected to purpose in a way that I think is probably mentally unstable, but it's really interesting. And so I'm obsessed with this idea of being meaningful, of making an impact. And so every time I make something, like, I'm not that fun of a person, to be honest, because every time I make something, I am so in my head. And I make a lot. I create every week, lots of stuff. And I'm making stuff and I'm thinking constantly, how can this be me? How can this fulfill me? But how can this also touch somebody else's life? What does that look like? How is this image going to impact you? And I'm really interested in the you. And if I had it my way, I would sit here for an hour and just do like a focus group. Like, how does this make you feel? Tell me more. And I love to poll people like that and to really get a sense of how other people's brains are working in response to my images. What's your first reaction? What's your second reaction? And what's your third reaction? And if I make you stare at this picture, which probably you don't really want to do, if I make you stare at this for a long time, does your feeling change over time? And I truly believe that it does tend to change over time. I make a lot of images about pain, about darkness, but I think that they're really beautiful. And this is where unself-consciousness comes in again. Because I am happy to stand in a room and tell everybody that I love what I do, that I think that what I do is beautiful and meaningful. And I think that we as artists need to stop putting ourselves down and refusing to say that what we do is beautiful and meaningful and important. Because it is. Why would we do it if it wasn't? Do I always succeed? No, that's a whole other story. But it's something. It's something important to me, and I know that it's important to other people. I don't know, that one gives me the heebie-jeebies. I don't know why I put that. Ugh, yeah, I don't know. I create a lot of work. It's really dark. Those are my husband's hands. We don't talk about my husband. He's like the biggest hermit you'll ever meet. But he agreed to put his hands. He was like we negotiated. I said, I want your arms. He said, no arms, just hands. I was like, all right, we can make it work. Yeah. Do you know how easy it is to saran wrap yourself to a tree? It's actually very easy, like shockingly so. I just stood on a stool and my friend just went around the tree 100 times. And I was just stuck to the tree. It was great. So if you ever want to go out with your kids, have some fun, super great, super great. Okay. This is an image that we're going to talk about for a second. And this is where story is so important, okay? And so I want to tell you a quick story that started on December 18th, 2019. I found myself driving 3 hours away to a town I'd never been to pick up a little boy that I didn't know, to become his mother, temporarily. And I knew nothing about children, to a degree that was shocking that they let me go pick this child up. I became a foster parent in 2019, and my agency that licensed me just the week before I went on this trip called me, and they said, so we've got a child for you, and you'll probably want a little baby who has no issues to start, but we have a 2-year-old boy who is highly traumatized, and he's been in 3 foster homes in the last month and a half, and nobody will keep him, and we need you to go pick him up. So I said yes. And I drove 3 hours away, and I remember packing the car with 4 different sizes of diapers because I had no idea how to take care of a 2-year-old. I remember packing infant formula because I didn't know what a 2-year-old ate. I put the car seat in the car and didn't know if it was buckled in right. I just didn't know anything about how to take care of a child. But we got to this house. It was in the middle of this super crowded neighborhood. The front door was just open. And I went in the house, and there were kids everywhere, complete chaos in this house. And I learned that it was a babysitter. So I found the adult, and I said, hi, I'm here to pick up this kid. Where is he? And she said, oh, he's just there in the high chair. Feel free to take him. Okay, so I go to the kid, and I'm like, hi, I'm gonna pick you up. And he's just staring at me like I'm crazy. So I pick him up, and I'm like, shoot, can a 2-year-old walk? I don't know. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put you down. And I put him down, and he walks, of course, because he's 2, right? And I'm like, okay, we're gonna go to my car, and he's just not talking and just follows me. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put him in the car, and I try, and then I'm like, I don't know how to buckle a car seat. Where do you learn this stuff, you know? And so I buckle him in, and it took me an age to do. And then I went back to the woman, and I said, is there anyone here to say goodbye to him? And they said, no. And I said, okay, does anyone want to check my ID? No. So I just left. And I sat in the back seat of the car, and I held his little hand, and I just shook the whole time. I was terrified of what I was doing. I had no idea how to take care of this child. He just fell asleep for 3 hours, which was awesome, because then I could collect myself. And we got to my house, and I took him inside, and I said, here's your room. We have a giant bear for you. And he went and hugged the bear, and then proceeded to make my life complete chaos for 8 months. And I became his mother. I had always wanted to become a mother. I had not been able to become a mother. And so foster care was my ticket, and I was not going to waste it. And over those 8 months, I came to learn what it means to be a mother. How do you parent somebody with trauma? How do you parent a 2-year-old in general, even if they're not traumatized? Am I right? That's just a whole hellscape in and of itself. But having a traumatized 2-year-old who does not understand secure attachment to anybody, who is violent, who perhaps, was addicted to drugs when he was born, how do you navigate that? And I didn't know, but over those 8 months, this little boy, who I called Jude, became mine completely. We entered the pandemic together. We spent every waking moment, me and him, getting muddy up to our ears, just soaking each other in, giving him all the love I could give. And then the day came for him to go. And that day was the worst day of my life. When that day came, he was my child. I didn't know any different. Brains are very easy to trick. Hearts are even easier to trick. So that day came. I had fought for him for weeks. I had fought and fought for him not to go because he was going to a worse situation. But I lost that battle in court. And he left. And so I remember this car coming up to pick him up. And this woman got out of the car and she looked at me, and I think she could tell that I was breaking down. And she looked at me and she said, "Come here for a second." And she took me aside and she said, "I know this is a really hard day for you, but you need to buck up for him." So I said, "Okay," and I took a deep breath and I picked Jude up and I put him in the car seat and I buckled him in expertly. And I said goodbye. I said, "Mommy loves you and you're gonna have a great time at your sleepover." And I gave him a hug and I gave him a kiss. And the hardest thing that I ever had to do in my life was close that door to that car and walk away. And I remember they drove off, and I remember seeing them get to the stop sign down the street. And I remember that moment where I couldn't see the car anymore, and I just dropped to the floor and started sobbing uncontrollably because my baby had just left me. And I remember my husband picking me up and saying, "We have neighbors, please don't do this here." So we went inside, and I cried for about 10 more minutes. And then I very suddenly stopped. I just felt like something bloomed in me, and this wasn't the time for more tears. And I remember going into my office and just making art and deciding I have to express this right now, what this feels like to lose my child. And I made art like this that you see here. And it's incredible how knowing the story behind the work that someone's creating heightens it to a degree where you can now attach to it in a new way, where you can appreciate it in a new way that you may never have before. This is how I made this image. This image was created in a little studio space with my little table and some raspberries, really, really simple. All right, so this is the big question for me lately. How do we find our bravery in a cancel culture climate? How do we find the courage to say what we feel needs to be said when everybody has an opinion and everybody wants to shut us down? When perhaps you go to a conference and somebody takes out your beautiful pictures and somebody says, no, that's not an appropriate thing to say or to do or to show, to talk about, to create discussion around. I believe that one of my purposes in this life is to create a positive movement around grief, to learn how to talk about hard things in a way that is empowered. That is my purpose here. And yours might be different. So how do we find it? I have ideas, okay? One, you have an opinion. Everybody here has an opinion. If I say, okay, we're all gonna go to Starbucks after, what's your order? You have an opinion, right? If I say, what do you think happens after we die? You have an opinion. If I say, do you want someone to take pictures with your dead body in the forest? Do you have an opinion about that? I'm sure. So you have an opinion. What is it? Don't be afraid of it. I was so afraid of my opinions in the beginning of my career. I thought if I say this or if I say that, everyone's gonna be mad. Well, you know what? They're mad if you do and they're mad if you don't. So I have opinions. I explore those opinions. How am I going to visually represent this thing that I want to say? And then know why you're doing it. You know, like really have a reason for doing it. Know what your intent is. And if you don't, then that's where we get into this issue of lots of people talking and lots of people wanting to be heard, but there isn't really a meaning behind it. So know what that is. And then craft your story around that thing that you care so much about, and then share it. And that's how we do it. So there's this question, what do you believe in? And I honestly want you to leave here today thinking about this very deeply. What do you believe in? What is your worldview? How does that manifest in the work that you create? And you might be sitting here thinking, well, I just shoot like high school seniors. I don't really need to think about this. You're wrong. I just want you to know you're wrong. And I really, truly believe that, and this is why. I think we all need to know what we believe in and how that can manifest in what we do, whether that's your art or beyond your art. Because we have the capacity to enact positive change in others. And if we can enact change through the things that we express, how beautiful is that to make a change in the world? To have that platform to do something important. So when you leave here and you're thinking about this, think about what experiences have you had? What is your worldview? What history is important to you? What future is important to you? What emotions have led you to hold this belief? And the more you know these answers to those specific questions, the firmer you will become in expressing those opinions. Then how do you communicate it? I communicate it by stuffing myself in freezers, as one does naturally. You might not do that, okay? And that's fine. But how are you going to do it? So I wanted to go back to this picture to share a little bit of how I do it. What are the decisions that I'm making here? First, I photographed this bed. It was actually an inflatable mattress on the floor, so I could get more height above it. I photographed this bed. Then I photographed myself on the bed, but I needed a clean plate of it. I put a dent in the pillow next to me so that it looked like somebody's head was there. And this is very important, right? If I go back and we look at that, it makes a difference in the idea, in how you read this image. And so these little details are what make or break our visual medium. So there's a little indent in the pillow, okay? This already gives me vibes, right? You look at this and you're like, she's alone, but somebody was there. Am I right? And then I put this hole in the bed. I actually did this by taking the same picture of the plate of the bed, and I actually just took every single edge of the bed and rotated it and put them together to make this hole, because I didn't have a hole in the bed, obviously. It just probably doesn't even make sense, but like, do you get it? Does that make sense? Yeah. So I took all the, wait, I have a pointer. I took all the edges right here, this one, and I cut it out, and this side, and I cut it out, and the top, and I cut it out, and then I rotated them to face each other to make a hole in the bed. I don't have tools, you know what I mean? Like, I just got an imagination, so that's what I do. Okay, I smoothed it out a bit, right? I added my arm. I'm not really actually sure why I didn't have an arm in this picture, but I don't, so I added an arm. Okay, brightened it up. I added vines, another very important element to this. Why? Because they give you a sense that time has passed, that the natural world is overflowing into this space. And then I think that's it. I never know where I never know where the picture ends, because there's so many gosh darn steps that I do. The average file for me will be about 100 layers, and it's very confusing. I just recently had to share a Photoshop file with somebody, and they were like, I couldn't deal with this, so I just put everything in a folder. I was like, great, that's fantastic. So this is my process. It's thinking before I take the picture. It's knowing all those little details that will make you feel a certain thing. Because I am nothing if not a master manipulator, and I don't mean in Photoshop. I mean, I love to manipulate your emotions. Because if I do, then you're gonna feel something more deeply, and it'll stick with you, and then that might encourage you to enact change in a part of your life that you feel needs to be upgraded. That's my hope. That's the best case scenario. Sometimes people just really hate me, and that's okay too. because sometimes they change and they like me later. And sometimes people like me now and then they hate me later. And that's just life, isn't it? And especially the life of an artist. So I made this picture with this idea, this really simple idea in mind. This was right after Jude left. I was feeling incredibly bereft, lonely, empty. And I would go into his room almost every single day. And I would just lay there on the floor where the crib was, and I would just look at that crib. And it was always empty, and I didn't have anyone to put in it, and it broke me. But I forced myself to go lay down on that floor every single day and look. Because if we don't confront our darkness, it will eat us alive. So that's what I did. And then I made this picture about that loss, that feeling of looking at his bed and him not being there anymore. And this has become an image that means everything to me, because this has defined my life for the last 4 years. I'm going to leave you with one quote that I think sums everything up. Plants are more courageous than almost all human beings. An orange tree would rather die than produce lemons, whereas instead of dying, the average person would rather be someone they are not. What a brilliant statement. So be unselfconscious. Be brave in the face of criticism, because we all have something to say, and it has to be said. Thank you very much.